The small plastic stick in her hand felt like a judgment. Two pink lines, sharp and clear against the white background. They screamed a truth my body could never create. Sarah's eyes were filled with tears, but they were tears of pure joy. Her smile was the brightest I had seen in years. It was a smile that could light up the entire city of Denver. A smile that was tearing me apart from the inside out. "Mike," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mike, we finally did it." She threw her arms around my neck, pressing the positive pregnancy test against my back. I could feel its cheap plastic shape through my shirt. It felt like a weapon. My own arms moved on their own, wrapping around her waist, holding her tight. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo. It was a gesture of love, of shared happiness. But it was a lie. My smile was a mask. My embrace was a cage for the panic clawing at my throat. Something shattered inside me in that moment. It wasn't loud. It was a silent, deep fracture, like a sheet of ice cracking under an immense, unseen weight. I had to say something. I had to play the part of the overjoyed husband, the expectant father. The words were supposed to be easy. "I'm so happy. This is amazing. I can't believe it." But my tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth. "Sarah, I managed." My voice hoarse. "That's wonderful." She pulled back, her face beaming. She didn't notice the hollowness in my voice. She only saw what she wanted to see, the man she loved, sharing in the greatest moment of their lives. But our lives were no longer shared. In that instant, a wall of glass had descended between us. She was on one side, celebrating a miracle. I was on the other, trapped with a terrible, silent truth. The truth was simple: I was sterile. And this baby was not mine. But to understand the silence behind my smile, you have to go back. Back to a time when our life still felt real. When the foundation of our marriage didn't feel like quicksand. Our life in Denver was perfect. Or at least, it looked perfect from the outside. We had a modest house in a quiet suburb, with the Rocky Mountains standing like silent guardians on the horizon. We both had good jobs at the same tech company downtown in marketing. Me in accounting. We were a team. A well-oiled machine. Sarah was the ambitious one. The dreamer. Always pushing for the next promotion. I was a steady one. The anchor. Happy with the simple rhythm of our days. Weekdays were for work. Weekends were for us. We'd drive up into the mountains, the crisp Colorado air filling our lungs as we hiked trails lined with aspen trees. We'd explore the little breweries and cafes in the city, finding new favorite spots. In the evenings, we'd curl up on the couch, a fire crackling in the hearth, and lose ourselves in movies. It was a comfortable life, a happy life. There was only one thing missing. For me, at least. A child. I'd always wanted to be a father. I could picture it so clearly. Teaching a little boy how to throw a baseball in the backyard. Helping a little girl with her homework at the kitchen table. The sound of small feet running down the hallway on Christmas morning. That dream was a constant, warm ache in my chest. I would bring it up gently. Usually when we saw a family playing in Washington Park. "Look at them. Sarah," I'd say, pointing to a father pushing his daughter on a swing. "Don't you ever think about that for us?" She would always smile. A soft, almost apologetic smile. And squeeze my hand. "Of course I do. Honey. Just not yet. I'm so close to getting that director position. Just give me a little more time. Please." And I always did. I gave her time. I told myself that her career was important. That her life was good as it was. That the right moment would come. I loved her. And I wanted her to be happy. So I pushed my own dreams down, locked them away in a quiet corner of my heart, and waited. I waited for her to be ready. But all that waiting was based on a lie. Not her lie. Mine. A secret I had carried alone for over a year. A secret that made every one of her promises to wait a little longer feel like a small, cruel twist of a knife. It started with a routine physical. About a year before Sarah held up that pregnancy test. I was 37. Healthy. I never got sick. The checkup was just a formality for our insurance. A few days later, the doctor's office called. They wanted me to come back in to discuss some of my test results. They said it was nothing urgent. But the tone in the nurse's voice told a different story. I went alone. I didn't tell Sarah. Why worry her over nothing? I sat in the sterile examination room, the smell of antiseptic filling the air, and waited. Dr. Evans came in. A man with kind eyes and a serious expression. He didn't waste time with small talk. He pulled up my file on his computer screen, turned it toward me, and pointed at a series of numbers. Michael, he began, his voice gentle but firm. We ran a full panel, including a semen analysis, as part of your workup. I'm afraid the results are conclusive. I didn't understand. Conclusive of what? He took a deep breath. The analysis shows a complete absence of sperm. The medical term is azoospermia. The word hung in the air, heavy and foreign. Azoospermia. It sounded like a distant galaxy, not a condition that had anything to do with me. What does that mean? I asked, though I already felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. It means you are unable to conceive a child naturally, he said, his eyes full of sympathy. We ran the test twice to be sure. Based on your other hormone levels, it appears to be a congenital condition. Something you were born with. Born with it. A flaw in my design. The world went quiet. The doctor's voice became a muffled drone. I could see his mouth moving, saying words like options, adoption, and donor. But I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was a ringing in my ears. A single thought echoed in the silent, screaming space of my mind. I'm broken. I had always defined myself as a future father. It was a core part of my identity. And in one short, clinical sentence, Dr. Evans had erased it. He had taken a pen and crossed out the most important chapter of my life story before it had even been written. I left the clinic in a daze. I drove around for hours, the Denver skyline a blur through my tear-filled eyes. How could I tell Sarah? How could I look at the woman I loved and tell her that I was defective? That the family she might one day want was something I could never give her? I pictured her face. The disappointment. The pity. I couldn't bear it. What if she left me? The fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. So I made a decision. A terrible, cowardly decision. I would say nothing. I would carry this burden alone. I told myself I was protecting her, protecting our marriage. I would wait. Maybe she would decide she never wanted kids after all. Maybe the problem would just go away. It was a stupid, desperate hope, but it was all I had. So for a year, I lived a lie. Every time she said, just a little longer, a part of me was relieved, while another part of me died inside. I would lie awake at night, long after she had fallen asleep, and stare at the ceiling, the doctor's words playing on a loop in my head. A complete absence of sperm. Congenital. Something you were born with. I would secretly search the internet for miracle cures, for some 1 in a million medical breakthrough. But all I found were articles confirming what Dr. Evans had told me. My condition was permanent. Then, about 3 months ago, everything changed. We were having dinner, a normal Tuesday night, and out of nowhere, Sarah put down her fork, looked me straight in the eye, and said the words I had once longed to hear. Mike, she said, her voice serious. I've been thinking a lot. About us. About the future. And I think I'm ready. I stared at her, confused. Ready for what? To have a baby, she said. A small, hopeful smile on her lips. My career is in a good place. We're stable. I think it's time. My heart stopped. This was it. The moment I had dreaded. The moment my secret could no longer be contained. I should have told her then. I should have taken her hand, looked into her eyes, and confessed the truth I had been hiding for a year. I should have told her I was broken. But I couldn't. Looking at her hopeful face, seeing the genuine excitement in her eyes for the first time, I just couldn't bring myself to destroy it. A tiny, treacherous part of my brain whispered, what if the doctor was wrong? What if a miracle could happen? So I smiled. I told her I was the happiest man in the world, and we started trying. It was a charade. Every intimate moment was tainted by my secret. For me, it was an act of deception. For her, it was an act of creation. And in my heart, I prayed for a miracle that I knew, scientifically, was impossible. Which brings us back to that moment in our living room. Sarah in my arms, crying with joy, the plastic test in her hand, and the 2 pink lines that were not a miracle, but a curse. A confirmation of a betrayal so deep it didn't even have a name yet. The baby she was carrying, the baby we had finally made, was the product of my wife and another man. And as I stood there, playing the role of the happy, expectant father, one question began to burn through the fog of my shock. Not why, but who? That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. Sarah was beside me, breathing softly, a peaceful smile on her face even in her sleep. One hand rested protectively on her still flat stomach. She was dreaming of a future. Our future? I was wide awake, staring into the darkness, trapped in a nightmare. The questions came like relentless waves, crashing against the shore of my sanity. Who was he? Was he someone I knew? A friend? A colleague? The thought made my stomach churn with a sick, acidic heat. How long had this been going on? Was it a would-I mistake? A drunken slip-up? Or was this an affair? A long-running, calculated betrayal happening right under my nose? Every possibility was more painful than the last. I thought about my own lie, the secret I kept for a year about my condition. A wave of guilt washed over me. Did I deserve this? Did my silence somehow push her into another man's arms? I had hidden the truth to protect her, to preserve her happiness. But maybe all I'd done was build our marriage on a foundation of lies, making it easy for her to add her own. The thought offered no comfort, only a deeper sense of failure. I quietly slipped out of bed and went to the living room. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. Our wedding photo sat on the mantelpiece. 'Tis smiling. Happy people who thought they had forever. Who was that man? I didn't recognize his easy, trusting smile. He was a fool. A happy, ignorant fool. And I hated him. The next morning, I was a ghost. I moved through the motions of our routine automatically. I made coffee. I showered. I got dressed for work. Sarah, on the other hand, was glowing. She floated around the kitchen, humming to herself, talking a mile a minute about names, nurseries, and morning sickness, which thankfully she hadn't felt yet. I was thinking maybe a neutral color for the baby's room, she said, spreading cream cheese on a bagel, like a soft green or yellow. What do you think, Mike? Sounds nice, I said, my voice flat. The coffee tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. Are you okay? You seem quiet, she asked, finally noticing my mood. I forced a smile. It felt like stretching cold rubber. Just overwhelmed. In a good way. It's a lot to take in. It was the perfect excuse. And she bought it completely. She came over and kissed me, her lips warm against my cold skin. I know. Me too. It's wonderful. Isn't it? It's everything. I lied. The doctor's appointment was scheduled for the following afternoon. Sarah wanted me there for the first ultrasound. I want us to see our baby for the first time together, she'd said. The words were like a punch to the gut. Our baby? The lie was growing, taking on a life of its own. I agreed. Of course. I had to. The role of the devoted husband demanded it. Walking into the obstetrics clinic felt like walking to my own execution. The waiting room was filled with happy, expectant couples, their excitement a tangible thing in the air. They were all on one side of a great divide, and I was on the other. Sarah squeezed my hand, her palm warm and a little sweaty. I felt nothing. Inside the examination room, the air was cool and smelled of disinfectant. The sonographer was a cheerful woman who guided Sarah onto the table and explained the procedure. I stood by the wall, feeling like an intruder. Okay, Dad, you can come a little closer, the technician said, smiling at me. Dad, the word hit me with the force of a physical blow. I took a step forward, my legs feeling like lead. She moved the wand over Sarah's stomach, and a grainy, black and white image appeared on the screen beside the bed. It was just a flickering shape, a tiny blob. It was barely anything. Sarah gasped, her eyes filling with tears again. Oh, Mike, look, she whispered in awe. I looked. I saw nothing but a lie made visible, a testament to my wife's infidelity. And here, the technician said, flipping a switch. Let's see if we can hear the heartbeat. A sound filled the small room. A fast, rhythmic pulsing. Thump, 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 thump. It was strong. It was real. It was the sound of a life that was undeniably present. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The shock and the grief began to harden, to crystallize into something cold and sharp. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was a conspiracy. This tiny, living thing with its strong, steady heartbeat was the evidence. It was the weapon she was going to use to bind me to her life forever. Everything looks perfect, the doctor said after reviewing the scan. Healthy heartbeat. You're measuring at about 5 weeks and 3 days. Congratulations. You too. 5 weeks. The drive home was silent. Sarah was lost in her own happy world. occasionally glancing at the blurry ultrasound picture she held in her hand. My mind, the accountant's mind that loved numbers and timelines and order, was racing. 5 weeks. 5 weeks and 3 days. To be precise, I counted backwards. That would place the moment of conception squarely in the middle of the 3rd week of last month. And where was I during the 3rd week of last month? I was in Chicago for a 3-day accounting conference. I remembered it perfectly. I had flown out on a Tuesday morning and returned late on a Thursday night. During that exact window of time, I was hundreds of miles away. The timeline wasn't just suspicious. It was a mathematical certainty. The puzzle wasn't missing any pieces. It was a complete, ugly picture of betrayal. The last embers of my denial flickered and died. There was no miracle. There was no mistake by the lab. There was only this cold, hard fact. Sarah had cheated on me. She had gotten pregnant, and she was trying to pass the baby off as mine. When we got home, I told Sarah I had a headache and went to lie down. But I didn't sleep. I lay in the darkness of our bedroom and I planned. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest. But it was now accompanied by a new feeling, a cold, clear-eyed rage. I was done being the victim. I was done being the fool. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. She would just lie. She was good at lying. I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. I had to know everything. I had to know who. And I had to know why. From that day on, I became a detective in my own home. I started watching her. Really watching her. For the first time in a long time. It was terrifying what I started to see. Now that I was looking, her phone, which used to lie casually on the kitchen counter, was now always with her. It was either in her hand, in her pocket, or face down on the table beside her. She had recently changed her passcode. I discovered, when I casually tried our old anniversary date and it didn't work, she would get text messages at odd hours and angle her body away from me to read them. A quick, secretive smile sometimes flashing across her face, before she composed her features back into a neutral mask. Then there were the late nights at work. Over the past few months, they had become more frequent. A team dinner, a deadline on a big project. I had never questioned them before. I trusted her. Now, I saw them for what they were, opportunities, alibis. I remembered one night, about a month ago. She came home well after midnight, smelling faintly of wine and a men's cologne I didn't recognize. She said they'd gone out for celebratory drinks after landing a new client. I had believed her. I had even been proud of her. The memory now made me feel physically ill. And her sudden change of heart about having a baby. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was an abrupt, strategic decision. Looking back, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. She hadn't woken up one day and decided she was ready to be a mother. No. She had gotten pregnant or was planning to get pregnant with another man. And she needed a father for her child. A stable, reliable, unsuspecting provider. A fool who wanted a baby so desperately he would never think to question a miracle. I was a perfect cover story. My desire for a family was not a shared dream. It was a weakness she had decided to exploit. Each new observation was like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. The woman I had loved and trusted for 8 years was a stranger. A manipulative, calculating stranger who was sleeping beside me every night. I knew that simple observation wouldn't be enough. I needed more than just a collection of suspicious behaviors. I needed hard evidence. A name. A face. A confession. I didn't know how I was going to get it yet. But my course was set. I would play the part of the happy, expectant father. I would go to the appointments. I would talk about baby names and smile until my face ached. I would be the perfect husband. And all the while, I would be gathering the evidence I needed to tear her world apart. Just as she had torn mine. The thought brought me no joy. Only a grim, chilling sense of purpose. The game had changed. She had started it. But I was going to finish it. My chance came on a Saturday night. 2 weeks after the first ultrasound. We had just finished a silent, joyless dinner. Sarah seemed oblivious, chattering about a crib she saw online. I just nodded and smiled. My mind miles away, sorting through fragments of a plan that was not yet fully formed. She announced she was going to take a long, relaxing bath. The baby books say I need to de-stress, she said with a wink, heading toward the master bathroom. The moment the door clicked shut and I heard the sound of water running, my body went into motion. It was as if I were a different person. A man driven by pure, cold instinct. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. But my hands were steady. I walked over to the nightstand where she had left her phone, plugged into its charger. I picked it up. The screen was dark and silent, a smooth black mirror reflecting my own tense face. I pressed the power button. The lock screen lit up, showing a picture of us, smiling on a hike last summer. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. She had changed the simple 4-digit PIN, but I remembered helping her set up a new pattern lock a few months ago after she complained. She kept forgetting numbers. Her finger had traced a lazy S shape. For Sarah. I held my breath and traced the same pattern on the screen. It unlocked. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. I was in. For a moment, I just stared at her home screen. The neat rows of apps, a map of her life. A life that I was no longer a part of. My thumb hovered over the green message icon. This was it. The point of no return. I tapped it. The message list was mostly mundane. Group chats with her friends. Reminders from her mother. Appointment confirmations. But at the very top, pinned so it would never get lost, was a name I didn't recognize. David. The last message was from that afternoon. David, thinking of you. How are you and the little peanut feeling? My blood ran cold. The little peanut. He had a nickname for the baby. For the lie growing inside my wife. I opened the thread. My hands began to shake as I scrolled up. My eyes devouring months of conversations. It was all there. In stark black and white. Flirtatious jokes that turned into secret lunch dates. Complaints about work that bled into complaints about me. Mike's always so tired. He never wants to do anything spontaneous. Then, the messages became more explicit. Details of their meetings. The thrill of the risk. They talked about hotels. About afternoons spent in borrowed apartments. They had been sleeping together for nearly 6 months. The timeline stretched back further than I could have imagined. And then I found it. The messages from the week I was in Chicago. David, hotel is booked. Can't wait to have you all to myself for a whole night. Sarah, me too. He just left for the airport. I'll tell him I have a team dinner. I feel a little guilty. David, don't. You deserve to be happy. I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a planned, deliberate rendezvous. The next messages were from after she had returned home. Sarah, that was amazing. But I'm worried. We weren't careful. David, everything will be fine. Maybe it's a good thing. A little David or Sarah running around. Sarah, don't joke. What would I even do? And then, a few weeks later. Sarah, David. I'm late. David, are you sure? Sarah, I took a test. It's positive. Oh my God. What are we going to do? His reply came a few hours later. It was the message that finally extinguished the last flicker of humanity I felt for either of them. David, it's okay. We can make this work. Mike wants a baby more than anything. Right? He'll be thrilled. He'll never question it. This can be our secret. Our secret. They had planned it. They had discussed it. They had decided my fate. My future. My fatherhood. Over a series of text messages. I wasn't a husband. I was a solution. A convenience. A walking, talking cover story for their sordid little affair. The sound of the water turning off in the bathroom snapped me back to reality. I quickly closed the messages, locked the phone, and placed it back on the charger. Exactly as I had found it. I retreated to my office downstairs, my mind a maelstrom of rage and betrayal. The messages were damning. But I needed more. I needed something tangible. I sat down at my laptop. My hands flew across the keyboard. A few years ago, I had helped Sarah set up her new laptop and linked all her accounts. I still had the password to her Google account written down in an old notebook. A password manager would have been more secure. But Sarah was careless. And her carelessness was about to become my greatest weapon. I logged in. Her entire digital life spread out before me: emails, calendars, photos. I ignored all of it and went straight for what I was looking for. I opened Google Maps. Then I clicked on the menu and selected your timeline. A map of Denver appeared on the screen, covered in a web of blue lines, tracking her every movement for the past year. I adjusted the date, going back to that Tuesday in the third week of last month, the day I flew to Chicago. The timeline showed her leaving the office at 6 p.m. It showed a brief stop at a restaurant downtown, and then, at 7:30 p.m., her location became a single, stationary dot, a dot that remained in the same place until 6 a.m. The next morning, I zoomed in on the location. It was a boutique hotel in the Cherry Creek neighborhood, a place we'd never been to together. My alibi was her opportunity. The data didn't lie. Now I had the what, the when, and the where. I just needed the who. Who was David? I opened a new tab and typed in the name of our company, followed by David. The search results were immediate. David Chen, a senior project manager in the marketing department, Sarah's department. His staff photo showed a man about my age, with an easy smile and confident eyes. He looked ordinary. There was nothing special about him, and that somehow made it worse. She hadn't left me for someone extraordinary. She had thrown our entire life away for this bland, generic-looking man. I found his social media profiles. His Instagram was mostly public. I scrolled through his feed, my heart pounding with a sick sense of dread. There were pictures of him hiking, pictures with friends at breweries, pictures of his dog. And then I saw it. A post from that exact Tuesday night. The night I was in Chicago. The night Sarah was at the hotel. The picture wasn't of them. He wasn't that stupid. It was an artful shot of two glasses of red wine on a small table, with the blurred lights of the city visible through a large window behind them. The caption was simple, a perfect evening. It could have been anyone. It could have been a coincidence. But my eyes were drawn to the edge of the frame, to a piece of fabric draped over the back of a chair. It was a dark floral pattern, silky and distinct. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that pattern. I had bought her that blouse for her birthday 2 months ago. I could picture her wearing it, the way it shimmered under the light. She had been there, in that room, with him. That was it. The final piece. The entire grotesque puzzle was complete. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. The pain was immense, a physical pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But beneath the pain, something else was rising. The shock was gone. The confusion was gone. Even the all-consuming grief was beginning to recede, replaced by a feeling that was as cold and sharp and clear as ice. Rage. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was a quiet, calculating fury. They had taken everything from me. My trust, my love, my future, my dream of being a father. They had turned me into a joke, the centerpiece of their twisted little plan. Sarah's tears of joy over the pregnancy test replayed in my mind. They weren't tears of happiness. They were tears of triumph. She had won. She had gotten everything she wanted. But the game wasn't over. They had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated me. They saw me as a stable, predictable, boring accountant, the nice guy who would never suspect a thing. They didn't know the man I was becoming in that dark office. A man who now had all the evidence he needed. A man who understood numbers and leverage. A man whose quiet life had been demolished, leaving nothing behind but a burning desire for a different kind of accounting. A final reckoning. I saved a screenshot of the Instagram post. I downloaded her location data. I took pictures of the text messages. I was no longer a husband. I was an auditor. And I was about to uncover the most devastating fraud of my life. In the days that followed, I became a master of deception. On the outside, I was the perfect expectant father. I rubbed Sarah's back when she complained of morning sickness. I went with her to a bookstore and we bought a stack of baby books, my hand resting on hers as we flipped through pages of smiling infants. I discussed names with a manufactured enthusiasm, agreeing that Oliver was a strong choice for a boy and Chloe was beautiful for a girl. Every smile, every gentle touch, every word of excitement was a carefully crafted lie, a shield to hide the cold, meticulous planning happening inside my head. My evenings were no longer spent relaxing on the couch. After Sarah went to bed, I would retreat to my office, transforming it into a war room. The rage had not subsided. It had focused. It was no longer a wildfire, but a laser, cutting through the emotional fog and allowing me to think with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about getting a divorce anymore. That was too simple, too clean. They had conspired to ruin my life, to trap me in a cage of deceit. A simple separation wouldn't balance the books. They needed to feel a fraction of the humiliation and loss they had inflicted on me. I spent hours digging deeper, compiling a digital dossier of their affair. I went through Sarah's credit card statements, which we shared. I found records of lunches at intimate restaurants, charges for gifts I never received, and, most damningly, the charge for the hotel room in Cherry Creek. She had paid for it herself, probably thinking it was smarter than letting David use his card. Another mistake. Every piece of evidence was saved, cataloged, and stored in a password-protected folder on a new flash drive. The most sickening discovery came from an old email thread between them that I found buried in her trash folder. It was from just before she told me she was ready to have a baby. David, are you sure about this? What if he finds out? Sarah, he won't. He wants this so badly. David, it's almost sad. He'll be so grateful. So happy. He'll never look too closely. It's the only way for us to have this. And for me to not lose everything I've worked for. It's almost sad. That line echoed in my head for hours. She didn't just betray me. She pitied me. My deepest, most vulnerable desire for a family was, in her eyes, a pathetic weakness to be exploited. My love was a tool. My trust was a shield. The realization was liberating. It severed the last lingering thread of affection I might have had for the woman I married. There was no room for mercy now. My plan began to take shape. Built onto pillars, professional ruin and personal devastation. I started by researching our company's employee handbook, which I downloaded from the internal server. I found the section on workplace conduct. There it was. Clear as day. Fraternization between employees in a direct or indirect reporting relationship, or within the same department, is strictly prohibited to avoid potential conflicts of interest, favoritism, and negative impacts on team morale. Violations may result in disciplinary action, up to and including termination. David was a senior project manager. Sarah was a marketing manager. They were in the same department. They were peers, but he was senior in rank. Their relationship was a clear violation of company policy. This would be my first line of attack. Next, I needed to solidify my legal position. I found a top-rated divorce attorney in Denver and scheduled a consultation, paying in cash so there would be no record on our statements. I sat in his plush office. A man named Mr. Harrison with sharp eyes in a sharper suit, and laid out the story. I was calm, methodical. I presented him with a flash drive. I have text messages, location data, credit card statements, and social media evidence. I said, my voice even. She is pregnant with his child, and they conspired to pass the baby off as mine. The one thing you should know is that I have a medical condition, azoospermia. I was diagnosed a year ago. I have the medical records to prove it. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. He had likely heard every story of infidelity imaginable. But this was a new level of deceit. Mr. Collins, he said, leaning forward, this is egregious. Your wife's actions constitute extreme and outrageous conduct. The fact that you can medically prove you are not the father makes this case ironclad. We can ensure you have no financial or legal responsibility for the child. That's good, I said. But I want more than that. I want to ensure the divorce settlement reflects her level of fraud. We can certainly argue for a disproportionate share of the marital assets in her favor, given the circumstances. He assured me. I left his office feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. The pieces were moving into place. The legal and professional traps were set. All that was left was the personal confrontation. And for that, I needed to face the other man. I needed to look David Chen in the eye. I didn't want to cause a public scene. I didn't want a fist fight in the office parking lot. That was clumsy. My approach had to be precise, controlled. I spent a few days observing his routine from a distance. I learned from his social media that he was a fitness enthusiast. A quick search showed he was a member of a high-end gym a few blocks from our office. His check-ins were like clockwork, 6:30 a.m. every weekday. This was the perfect venue. It was neutral ground, semi-private, and a place where he would feel off balance. I formulated a plan. I would confront him, but not to threaten him. I would confront him to get the final piece of evidence I needed, a confession, recorded on my terms. The morning I chose was a crisp Tuesday. The air was thin and cold. I dressed in workout clothes to blend in, something I hadn't worn in years. I felt like a spy in my own life. I sat in my car across the street from the gym, sipping coffee. My heart a steady, rhythmic beat. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. At 6:28 a.m., his gray Audi pulled into the parking lot. He got out, gym bag slung over his shoulder, earbuds already in place. I gave him a few minutes to get inside and start his workout before I followed. The gym was busy but not packed. The air smelled of sweat and cleaning solution. I spotted him easily. He was on a weight machine, his face contorted with effort. I watched him for a few minutes from across the room. I watched the man who had slept with my wife, who had fathered her child, who had helped plot the destruction of my life. He was just a man, lifting weights, oblivious. I walked over to the water fountain near his machine, pretending to fill my bottle. As he finished his set, breathing heavily, I approached him. My timing was perfect. "David Chen?" I asked, keeping my voice low and calm. He pulled out an earbud, looking at me with mild annoyance. "Yeah. Do I know you?" "My name is Mike Collins," I said. "I'm Sarah's husband." The change in his expression was immediate and profound. The color drained from his face. His confident gym-goer persona vanished, replaced by the panicked look of a cornered animal. His eyes darted around, checking to see if anyone was listening. "Oh, hi," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I think you know," I said softly. "We need to talk." "Not here. Outside." He hesitated, his mind clearly racing, searching for an escape route. But there was none. He knew it. I knew it. Reluctantly, he nodded, grabbed his towel, and followed me out of the gym. We walked in silence to a small, empty park adjacent to the building. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the mountains, casting long, cold shadows. He broke the silence first, his voice a nervous rush. "Look, man. Whatever you think is going on, it's not." "Stop." I cut him off, my voice still quiet but with an edge of steel. "Don't lie to me. David. I know everything. I know about the hotel. I know about the last 6 months. And I know about the baby." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "How did you find out?" "That doesn't matter," I said, taking a small step closer. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see that there was no anger in them. No tears. Just a cold, empty resolve. "What I want to know is, did you really think this would work? Did you honestly believe you could put a child in my wife and I would just raise it as my own? No questions asked." He had the decency to look ashamed. He stared at the ground, unable to meet my gaze. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." It started as just a fling. Sarah was unhappy. She said you were always working. That you were distant. Distant. A single, harsh laugh escaped my lips. "I was working to build a life for us. The life she said she wanted." I shook my head. Not in sadness, but in disbelief at their pathetic justification. "And the baby? Was that part of the fling too?" He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "That was an accident. But Sarah, she wanted to keep it. She came up with the plan. She said you'd be happy. She came up with the plan." He had just confirmed it. Before I said another word, I subtly reached into my pocket and activated the voice recorder on my phone. "She was right," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "I was happy. Thrilled. Even. There's just one small problem you two didn't account for." "What?" he asked, a flicker of hope in his eyes, perhaps thinking there was a way out of this. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before I delivered the final blow. "I'm sterile. David. I'm medically, certifiably incapable of having children. I've known for over a year." So when she came to me with that pregnancy test, I didn't see a miracle. I saw a crime scene. The blood drained completely from his face. He looked like he was going to be sick. The full scope of their miscalculation, the sheer, idiotic arrogance of their plan, was finally dawning on him. He had been caught in a trap he didn't even know existed. "Oh, God," he whispered, stumbling back a step. "She didn't know?" "No, she didn't," I said. "But you do now, and you're going to help me." My voice was no longer conversational. It was a command. He stared at me, his eyes wide with fear. The power had shifted completely. I was no longer the victim. I was in control, and the reckoning had just begun. David stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The cool morning air seemed to crystallize around us. He looked less like an adulterer and more like a kid who'd been caught cheating on a final exam, and had just been told the principal was his father. "Help you?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Help you do what?" "It's simple," I said, my tone patient, as if explaining a complex accounting principle to a new intern. "You're going to tell me everything, and I'm going to record it. You're going to confirm that you've been having an affair with Sarah. You're going to confirm that you are the father of her child. And you're going to confirm that it was her plan to pass the baby off as mine. You're going to give me the truth, because the alternative is much, much worse for you." His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of defiance. "Or what?" "You'll tell the company." They'll fire us both. What's the difference? I almost smiled. He was still thinking small. He was thinking about his job. I was thinking about his life. Let's think about this logically. David, I said, taking another calm step forward. My phone was still recording in my pocket, capturing every word. Scenario A, you cooperate. I get what I need. I divorce my wife. I handle the situation with the company discreetly. It will be messy. And yes, you'll probably lose your job. But it will be a professional matter. It ends there. You walk away, bruised, but whole. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Then there's scenario B. I continued, my voice dropping lower, colder. You don't cooperate. I still have enough evidence to ruin you at work. So that's a given. But I won't stop there. I won't be discreet. I will make this very, very public. I'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery and fraud, and I will name you in the petition. Your name, David Chen, will be a public record, permanently linked to this sordid affair. I'll make sure every friend you have on social media knows exactly what you did. I'll contact your parents. Do they live here in Denver? I can find out. I'll make sure they know their son knowingly impregnated another man's wife and tried to trick him into raising the child. I will systematically dismantle your reputation and your life until the only thing people think of when they hear your name is this. He visibly paled. The threat of losing his job was one thing. The threat of total social annihilation was another. I had hit a nerve. I could see the frantic calculations happening behind his eyes as he weighed his options. He was a man who cared about appearances, about his reputation. His Instagram feed was a curated gallery of a successful, happy life. I was threatening to burn that gallery to the ground. You wouldn't. He breathed. But there was no conviction in his voice. A man who has lost everything has nothing left to lose. I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. Try me. The fight went out of him completely. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, shaky breath of defeat. Okay, he said. Okay. What do you want me to say? I didn't gloat. I felt no triumph. Only a grim sense of necessity. I guided him through it. My questions calm and precise. Have you been in a sexual relationship with my wife? Sarah Collins? Yes. He mumbled, staring at his shoes. For how long? About 6 months. Are you aware she is pregnant? Yes. Given my medical inability to have children, do you acknowledge that you are the biological father? He swallowed hard. Yes. And was it part of a plan, discussed between the two of you, to have me raise his child as my own, unaware of the true paternity? This was the hardest one for him. It was one thing to admit to an affair. It was another to admit to a conspiracy of this magnitude. He hesitated, his jaw working silently. Tell me the truth, David, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Yes, he finally whispered. It was her idea. I went along with it. Thank you, David, I said. That's all I needed. I stopped the recording and put the phone back in my pocket. The tiny file it contained was a nuclear bomb, and I had my finger on the button. David just stood there, looking broken. A part of me, a small, ghost-like echo of the man I used to be, felt a flicker of pity for him. He was weak, a follower, swept up in Sarah's ambition and deceit. But the feeling vanished as quickly as it came. His weakness didn't excuse his actions. He had made his choice. Don't contact her, I said as I turned to leave. Don't warn her. This conversation never happened. If she asks, you haven't seen me. Do you understand? He nodded numbly, not looking at me. I walked away without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the cold morning light. The drive to my office felt different that day. The usual Denver traffic, the familiar buildings, the distant mountains, it all seemed sharper, more defined. The world had come back into focus. I was no longer a victim, stumbling through a fog of grief and confusion. I was an agent of consequence. At work, I hid behind my spreadsheets and financial reports. But my mind was elsewhere. I spent the day refining the final stages of my plan. I drafted the email. It was addressed to the head of human resources, a woman named Brenda who had a reputation for being thorough and unyielding. When it came to company policy, the subject line was simple: formal complaint regarding employee misconduct. The body of the email was professional and devoid of emotion. I laid out the facts clearly and concisely. I stated that a prohibited relationship had been taking place between Sarah Collins, and David Chen of the marketing department. I attached the evidence methodically, a document with screenshots of their text messages, the hotel receipt, the link to David's incriminating Instagram post, and a summary of Sarah's GPS data. The final attachment was the audio file from that morning. I labeled it D. Chen admission of guilt. I read the email over and over, checking for any hint of personal anger or emotional language. There was none. It was as cold and impersonal as an audit report. It was perfect. I saved the draft. I wouldn't send it yet. The timing had to be just right. I wanted the email to land on Monday morning, giving HR the entire week to conduct their investigation. I wanted Sarah and David to walk into the office, completely unsuspecting, and have their world fall apart around them. That weekend was the strangest of my life. I was living in the final hours of my marriage, and I was the only one who knew it. I played my part to perfection. On Saturday, I helped Sarah assemble the crib she had ordered. As I tightened the last screw, I felt a profound wave of detachment. I was building a cage for a baby that wasn't mine, in a house that would soon be sold, with a woman who was about to become a stranger. The wood felt cold and foreign in my hands. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, stepping back to admire our work. Her hand was on her belly. "I can just picture him in here." "Me too," I said. And for the first time, my life felt effortless. The person she was talking to, the happy husband, wasn't me anymore. He was just a character I was playing until the final curtain fell. On Sunday night, we sat on the couch watching a movie, just like we had hundreds of times before. But I wasn't watching the screen. I was watching her. I studied her face, the familiar curve of her smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. I tried to find the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had built a life with, but she was gone. Or maybe she had never been there at all. Maybe I had just been in love with a version of her I had created in my own mind. She fell asleep on my shoulder before the movie ended. Her breathing was soft and even. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. It was the most monstrous thing I had ever seen. I didn't feel sadness or anger. I felt nothing at all. A complete and total void. The love had been surgically removed, and all that was left was scar tissue. After I carried her to bed, I went back to my office. I opened my laptop and pulled out the draft of the email. My cursor blinked over the send button. It was time. This was more than just a click. It was an execution. It was the end of Sarah Collins. The end of David Chen. The end of Mike and Sarah. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of whatever came next for me. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a long moment. Then, with a steady hand and a heart of stone, I clicked. Monday morning felt unnaturally calm. The storm had been unleashed, but the sky above our house was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I woke up before Sarah, brewed the coffee, and went through the motions of our morning routine with a detached precision. It felt like watching a movie of my own life, knowing the final, devastating scene was about to play out. Sarah came into the kitchen, yawning and stretching. She was wearing my old college sweatshirt, and for a fleeting, painful second, she looked like the girl I had married. "Morning," she mumbled, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Big week. We have the presentation for the new ad campaign on Wednesday. I'm sure you'll do great," I said, my voice perfectly even. I wondered if she would still have a job on Wednesday. The thought brought a grim, hollow feeling. "Are you headed out early?" she asked, noticing I was already dressed. "Yeah. Have an early meeting I need to prep for," I lied. The only meeting I was interested in was the one I knew was about to happen in the HR department. We parted ways at the door with a kiss. It was dry, perfunctory, a ghost of a gesture. As I drove away, I looked at her house in the rearview mirror. It didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a building filled with memories that were now tainted, like old photographs left out in the rain. I didn't go to the office. I couldn't. I drove to a small park overlooking the city and sat on a bench, the flash drive containing all my evidence feeling heavy in my pocket. I watched the cars streaming into downtown Denver, a river of anonymous people heading to work, their lives orderly and predictable. My own life had veered so far off course it was unrecognizable. Around 9:15 a.m., I imagined the scene. Brenda in HR, opening her mail, her eyes widening as she read the complaint, the methodical way she would open each attachment, her expression hardening with each new piece of evidence, the phone call she would make to her boss, the chain of command being alerted, the investigation beginning. My phone buzzed in my pocket around 10:30 a.m. It was Sarah. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. Sarah, where are you? Brenda from HR just pulled David out of a meeting. Something feels weird. I stared at the message. A cold knot tightening in my stomach. It was starting. I didn't reply. Another text came 20 minutes later. This one was frantic. Sarah, Mike. They just called me into her office. What is going on? People are staring. Call me. Silence. I watched a man throwing a frisbee for his dog. The dog would leap into the air, catching it with joyful abandon. Its world simple and full of trust. I envied that dog. I knew what was happening in that office. Brenda would be professional, clinical. She would present them with the allegations, separately at first. She would show them the evidence, the text messages, the hotel receipt. Their denials would crumble into panicked silence as she laid out the irrefutable proof of their affair. Then, she would play the final card, the recording of David's confession. That would be the end of it. There would be no escape. I had to force myself to stay away from the office, to not drive by, to not try and catch a glimpse of the fallout. My part in that chapter was over. My email had been the arrow shot from the darkness. Now, I just had to wait for it to find its target. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, driving aimlessly through the mountain roads west of the city, the aspens just beginning to turn gold. I thought about the life I had wanted. The simple, happy life with a family. It felt like a dream I'd had a long time ago. A story that belonged to someone else. Who was I now? I was a man who had methodically orchestrated the ruin of his own wife. I didn't recognize this person. He was cold, efficient, and empty. I finally drove home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. The house was dark. Sarah's car was in the driveway. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. The final confrontation. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet. I found her in the living room, sitting on the floor in the dark, surrounded by the unassembled pieces of a new baby stroller that had been delivered that day. Her face was pale and streaked with tears. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. She looked up at me as I switched on a lamp, and her expression was one I had never seen before. It was a terrifying combination of hatred, fear, and utter devastation. It was you? She whispered, her voice a raw, broken rasp. You did this? I didn't deny it. I walked over and stood before her, looking down. I told them the truth. I said, my voice devoid of emotion, a truth you seemed happy to hide. She scrambled to her feet, her movements clumsy, frantic. You destroyed me. My career, my reputation, everything is gone. They put me on administrative leave. They're going to fire me. Mike and David, they escorted David out of the building like a criminal. He's a criminal, I replied calmly. And so are you. You just haven't been charged yet. Her face contorted in disbelief. For what? For falling in love? She shrieked, the words echoing in the silent house. Love? I laughed. A short, ugly sound that held no humor. You call this love? Lying, cheating, conspiring to defraud me into raising another man's child for the rest of my life? That's not love, Sarah. That's a parasite, looking for a host. The word defraud hit her. She finally understood that I knew more than just about the affair. How? How could you know? Did you really think I was that stupid? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Did you think I was so desperate for a child that I would just accept a miracle without question? Did you ever, for 1 second, stop to think about me and your selfish little plan? She started to cry again. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs. I was going to tell you someday. She stammered through her tears. I didn't know how. I love you, Mike. I still do. Stop, I said. The word like a crack of a whip. Don't you dare say that to me. Not now. The man you loved, or pretended to love, is gone. You killed him. He died the moment you showed me that pregnancy test. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I tossed it onto the coffee table in front of her. It landed with a soft, final thud. What's this? She asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Divorce papers, I said. I've already signed them, along with a petition to establish non-paternity. My lawyer assures me that given the evidence, it will be a very quick process. The house will be sold. We will split the assets, though I'm petitioning for a larger share, given the fraudulent nature of our circumstances. You will not get a penny of spousal support. She stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. She looked from it back to my face, her eyes searching for something petty. Regret. A sign of the man she used to know. But there was nothing there. Just a cold, empty stranger. And the baby. She whispered, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. I looked at her hand, at the slight curve of her belly that was just beginning to show. I felt the pang of something. A ghost of pain for the child. An innocent party in this whole disaster. But my resolve did not waver. The baby is your responsibility, I said, my voice flat and final. It's yours. And it's David's. It has nothing to do with me. Her face crumbled. The last shred of hope she might have been clinging taught that I might, out of some lingering love or sense of duty, still help her evaporated. She was truly alone. She had made her choices, built her web of lies, and now it had collapsed, trapping her in the wreckage. I turned and walked toward the door. I had a bag packed in my car. I was going to a hotel. I had no idea where I would go after that. Mike! Wait! She cried out, her voice desperate. Please, don't leave me like this. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. You left me a long time ago, Sarah, I said, my voice quiet. I'm just catching up. I walked out the door and closed it gently behind me, the sound of her sobbing echoing in the empty house. As I walked to my car under the cold, distant stars, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victory. I just felt empty. The war was over. I had won. But I was standing alone on the battlefield, surrounded by the ruins of my own life. The first few weeks were a blur of sterile hotel rooms and legal paperwork. I existed in a strange limbo. A man without a past and with no clear vision of a future. The life I had known for 8 years had been amputated, and I was left navigating the world with a phantom limb. A constant, dull ache where my marriage used to be. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, handled everything with brutal efficiency. He was right. The evidence was so overwhelming that there was no fight left in Sarah. She signed the papers without contest. I saw her one last time when we met to divide our personal belongings. We stood in the living room of the house that was no longer ours, a for sale sign already staked into the front lawn. She was thinner, paler. The glow of her pregnancy was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. She didn't look at me. We moved like ghosts around each other, placing items into boxes labeled his and hers. The silence was thick with unspoken words, with years of shared history that now felt like a fictional story. When we were done, she finally spoke. Her voice flat. David lost his job. He's moving back to California to live with his parents. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And to my surprise, I almost meant it. I no longer felt any rage toward him. He was just a pathetic, weak man who had made a terrible mistake. He was her problem now, not mine. He wants nothing to do with me or the baby. She continued, her gaze fixed on the empty space where our couch used to be. He said I trapped him. That this was all my fault. Was it? I asked, my voice gentle. There was no accusation in it, only a genuine question. She looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something other than defiance or self-pity in her eyes. I saw a flicker of genuine remorse. Not all of it, she whispered, but most of it. I was ambitious, Mike. I wanted everything. The perfect career, the perfect family. When I found out I was pregnant with his child, I panicked. I saw a way to keep everything, to fit it all together into the life I thought I deserved. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Look how that turned out. I didn't know what to say. There was nothing left to say. The apologies were too late. The explanations meaningless. I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah, I said as I picked up my last box. It was a small, inadequate phrase for the end of a marriage, but it was all I had. You too, Mike, she replied, her voice barely audible. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The divorce was finalized a month later. True to his word, Mr. Harrison had secured me a larger portion of the assets due to the fraudulent circumstances. I sold the house, split the proceeds, and found myself with a significant amount of money in a life that was a complete blank slate. I quit my job. I couldn't bear the thought of walking those halls, of seeing the pitying looks from former colleagues, of existing in the same space where my life had been so thoroughly dismantled. I packed a few bags, put the rest of my belongings in storage, and just started driving. I drove north, away from the jagged peaks of the Rockies, into the vast, open plains of Wyoming and Montana. 4 days. I just drove. With no destination in mind. The sheer emptiness of the landscape was comforting. It mirrored the emptiness inside me. The long, straight roads that stretched to the horizon felt like a physical representation of the endless, featureless future that lay before me. I spent my nights in cheap roadside motels. The kind with flickering neon signs and bedding that smelled of bleach. I ate in greasy spoon diners, listening to the conversations of strangers, feeling utterly invisible. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a constant companion. Sometimes, it would ambush me in the middle of the night, and I would wake up with my heart pounding. The image of Sarah's joyful face holding that pregnancy test burned into my mind. Other times, it was a low, constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. A reminder of what I had lost. I lost the woman I loved. Or at least the woman I thought I loved. But I had lost more than that. I had lost my dream. The dream of being a father, of having a family, was gone. It had been stolen from me. First by a flaw in my own biology, and then by Sarah's deceit. The idea of ever trusting someone again, of ever opening myself up to that kind of vulnerability, seemed impossible. The betrayal hadn't just broken my heart, it had broken my faith in everything. One afternoon, I found myself in a small town in Oregon, nestled in a valley by a river. I was tired of driving, tired of running. I rented a small, furnished cabin just outside of town, telling the owner I'd be there for a month. A month turned into 2, then 3. My days fell into a simple, quiet rhythm. I woke up early. I went for long walks along the river. I read books I'd always meant to read. I taught myself how to cook more than just the simple meals I used to make. I avoided people. For the most part, the quiet hum of the forest was better company than the polite, meaningless chatter of strangers. Slowly, very slowly, something began to shift inside me. The emptiness started to feel less like a void and more like open space. The silence started to feel less like loneliness and more like peace. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, quiet sadness. I began to mourn my old life, not with rage, but with a quiet sense of loss, like mourning a friend who had passed away long ago. I started to think about my own role in the disaster. My lie, hiding my sterility from Sarah. I had told myself I was protecting her. But was that the whole truth? Or was I protecting myself? Protecting my own ego? My own fear of being seen as less than a man? My lie hadn't caused her affair, but it had created an environment of dishonesty. It had been the first crack in the foundation. Her betrayal was 1,000 times worse. A deliberate act of cruelty. But my hands weren't entirely clean. And for the first time, I was able to admit that to myself. It wasn't about blame. It was about acceptance. About understanding my own flawed humanity. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting on the covered porch of my cabin, watching the water drip from the pine needles. I thought about the baby. Sarah's baby. Here she would have been born by now. I wondered, with a strange sense of detachment, what had happened? Had Sarah kept the child? Was she raising it alone? Had David come back into the picture? I felt a strange pang in my chest. It wasn't regret. It wasn't longing. It was a kind of sorrow for the child. An innocent soul born into such a tangled mess of lies. I hoped, with a sincerity that surprised me, that the child was safe. That it was loved. It deserved that. At least. That brief moment of empathy felt like a turning point. It was the first time in a long time I had thought about someone else's well-being, without filtering it through the lens of my own pain. The anger was gone. The need for revenge was gone. All that was left was the truth. The silent truth I had carried. And the devastating truth I had uncovered. And I realized that I had survived them both. I was still here. Broken. Yes. Changed. Certainly. But breathing. Living. The man who had sat in that doctor's office a year and a half ago, feeling like his world had ended, was gone. The man who had coldly plotted the destruction of his wife was also gone. I wasn't sure who this new man was yet, but he was free. He was free from the lies, free from the rage, and free from the life that was never truly his. And in that freedom, there was a quiet, unexpected hope. I stayed in that small Oregon town for nearly a year. I got a part-time job at the local library, stacking books and helping people find what they were looking for. It was quiet work, anonymous work. It suited me. The simple act of putting stories in order felt like a small way of bringing order back to my own chaotic internal world. The people in town were friendly but respected my privacy. They knew I was from somewhere else, that I had a story. But they never pressed. They just accepted me as Mike from the library. And for that, I was grateful. I started hiking again, exploring the dense, green forests of the Pacific Northwest. There was a different kind of silence in those woods compared to the sharp, thin air of the Rockies. It was a damp, ancient silence, full of the smell of moss and wet earth. It was a silence that absorbed my pain, that asked for nothing in return. On those long walks, I finally began to untangle the knots of grief and betrayal inside me. I realized that my identity had been completely wrapped up in the idea of being a husband and a future father. When those roles were stripped away, I felt like I was nothing. But this past year of solitude had forced me to build a new identity, one that was based on simpler things: the satisfaction of a day's work, the beauty of a forest trail, the quiet pleasure of reading a good book. I was no longer defined by my relationship to someone else, or by a biological failure. I was just Mike. And for the first time, that felt like it might be enough. One day, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from a former colleague at my old firm, a friendly acquaintance named Mark. The subject line was "Long time no see." I hesitated before opening it. It was a link to my past, a past I had tried so hard to leave behind. Curiosity won out. The email was brief. He said he hoped I was doing well and that he heard I left Denver. He mentioned that he had run into Sarah a few weeks ago. My heart gave a small, involuntary jolt. He wrote that she was working for a small nonprofit organization now, and that she seemed to be doing okay. And then he added the line that I had both dreaded and, in some strange way, been waiting for. She had her baby. By the way, a little boy. She named him Theo. Theo. A name. It made him real. He wasn't just a baby anymore. He was a person. A little boy named Theo. I closed the email and stared out the window of the library, watching the rain fall. I felt a wave of profound sadness wash over me. But it was a clean sadness, unburdened by anger or bitterness. It was a sadness for a life that could have been, for the innocent child caught in the crossfire of his parents' mistakes, and for the man I used to be, who had wanted nothing more than to be that little boy's father. I thought about what my life would be like now if I had never found out. If I had lived the lie, I would be raising Theo, loving him as my own. We would be a family. On the surface, it might have looked like happiness, but it would have been a happiness built on a lie, a fragile house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The truth, as devastating as it was, had set me free. It had been a painful, brutal surgery, but it had removed the cancer of deceit from my life. A few months later, I decided it was time to leave Oregon. The town had been a sanctuary, a place to heal, but it wasn't a place to live. I still felt the pull of the mountains, the place I had once called home. But I couldn't go back to Denver. Not yet. I chose a small town in the foothills of Colorado. A few hours' drive from my old life. It was close enough to feel familiar, but far enough to be a fresh start. I found a job as an accountant for a local outdoor gear company, a place filled with people who were passionate about mountains and fresh air. It was a good fit. I bought a small, simple house with a view of the peaks. Life was quiet. It was peaceful. It wasn't the life I had dreamed of, filled with the noise and laughter of a family. But it was my life. It was real. And it was honest. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on a bench in the town park. It was a beautiful autumn day, and the park was full of families. Fathers were throwing footballs with their sons. Mothers were pushing their daughters on the swings. The air was filled with the sound of children's laughter. A few years ago, a scene like this would have been torture. It would have been a stark, painful reminder of everything I couldn't have. I would have felt a bitter, envious ache in my chest. But as I sat there now, I felt something different. I watched a young father kneel down to tie his son's shoelace, his movements full of a gentle, patient love, and I smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. The ache was still there, a faint echo in a distant room of my heart. I knew a part of me would always mourn the father I never got to be. Some wounds leave scars that never fully fade. But the bitterness was gone. The anger was gone. In their place was a quiet acceptance, a sense of peace. My dream hadn't come true. My life had been shattered into a million pieces. But I had survived. I had gathered the pieces of myself and built something new. Something quieter. Perhaps. Something lonelier. Certainly. But something strong. Something true. I had lost the family I thought I wanted. But I had found myself. I had been forced to confront the silent truth within my own body. And the loud, vicious lies of the person I trusted most. It had nearly destroyed me. But it hadn't. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the park, I stood up from the bench. The air was getting crisp. It was time to go home. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe one day I would meet someone new. Maybe I would learn to trust again. Or maybe I would spend the rest of my life in the quiet company of myself in the mountains. And for the first time, either of those possibilities felt okay. I walked toward the gate, my hands in my pockets, my steps steady and unhurried. I was alone. But I was not lost. My story was not the one I would have written for myself. But it was my story. And it was far from over.